Hey guys, we're going to be looking at Numbers 27, 12 through 23 today. Um, as with a lot of my last of my couple posts, they've been dealing a lot with leadership and kind of using Moses as the example of what it looks like as someone who's leading kind of a disgruntled group of people and how a leader should handle themselves in that way. Um, but when you get to Numbers 27, God's kind of starting to wind up Moses' time, and um, Moses pleads to God that there will be somebody else to take his place. Um, what's very interesting is that in chapter 26, we see that all the people that Moses had been having problems with, the ones that were complaining about wanting to go back to Egypt, about food, grumbling against God, against Moses and Aaron, all of that generation is dead. Um, they take an entirely new census, and at the end, there's sort of a cliff note that says, and no one else from the original census was alive. So it's an entirely different new group of people, but they're getting closer and closer to the promised land. Um, but because of Moses' disobedience, he's not going in. Um, God tells him that he's going to take him up to a mountain, that Moses will be able to see over the valley and be able to see the promised land that God has um, told Israel that they will inherit. But God said that's as far as you're going to get. Um, so Moses says, God, I've seen how these people have acted. I've seen their cycles. He's seen their complaining, heard their grumbling, all that. And Moses wants to make sure that there will be somebody in place who will be able to lead these people. Because if they don't have somebody, it's going to be like sheep without a shepherd. They're just going to go in the promised land and go into Canaan and get completely destroyed because these people have no idea what they're doing. So Moses pleads with God and says, give them somebody to follow. God honors his request and chooses Joshua to take Moses' place. Now, this is the first time we've heard of Joshua. If you look back to Exodus 14, Moses and the Israelites are about to face the Amalekites. Moses turns to Joshua and says, "Go find the strongest men and go fight these guys and destroy them." Then, if you look at Exodus 24, it's mentioned that Joshua is Moses' right hand first assistant. That wherever Moses goes, Joshua's right there with him, kind of under a mentor relationship. If you look at Exodus 33, Moses comes out of the tent of meeting, and Joshua is actually staying behind, staying in the tent, speaking and talking with God. And then if you look back a little, or if you look in Numbers 13, um, Joshua is included in the spies that go out in Canaan. They go out and look to see, you know, what the food's like, what the land's like, how the enemies, what Israel is stacking up against. So God chooses a person who has been in areas of leadership um, to kind of take the reins from Moses. I find it very interesting, even highlighting these four things from these different books, such as he was the commander of the army. Later, we'll read when we get to Joshua in a little bit that Joshua was the one in charge of the army. The whole thing of Joshua is nothing but like battles and the conquest of Canaan and taking over, taking back what God promised was theirs. So his experience with the army throughout Exodus and throughout Numbers really seasoned him for what God had planned for him later. He was an assistant to Moses. Um, Therefore, he was at least seen in some type of leadership role by the people. Um, Although it's a new generation, they still all would have recognized and all would have seen and understood that he was in a place of leadership and that Moses was investing and mentoring him and the people would have respected him for that. Um, he also spoke with God. I mean, God's preparing him for the mediator role, to where he's the go-between between the people and God, and to hear God's voice and to be able to clearly communicate, to say, this is where we're going to strike next, this is where we're going to camp next, this is what God wants us to do. He was being prepared for that role. And then he spied out the land. As the leader, you have to know where you're going, and you have to have a focus and an understanding of what's ahead. And being able to go in and spy out the land and see the people, this just gave Joshua one more advantage over anybody else that possibly could have been qualified to do so. Um, God chose somebody who was already in an area of leadership, to carry on the responsibility um, of leading the nation. He didn't choose somebody who was fresh, new, just out of the academy. He chose somebody who had been through the wilderness, who had been through and heard the complaining, but yet had been faithful. Someone who had been um, through war, someone who had been through the hard times, so that they know how to be calm and collected and know how to have a level head when it came to leading the people of Israel. Um, so, with all that said, Moses didn't pick Joshua. God did. God chose Joshua to be the leader. Um, but with everything that Joshua had been through, it kind of put him in a good position to take that. God had been orchestrating the events even up till that point to prepare him for the job that he had ahead of him. So I pose two questions to you, or two ideas. Um, Joshua was where God wanted him to be. Are you in a position that God can use you? Are you getting experience? Or are you just kind of sliding along and jumping from one thing to the next? Are you really investing in something that God can use for His glory later? Or are you just kind of ho-hum, jumping around at things? Uh, we need to do our best to put ourselves in prime situations to where we can understand that God is molding us and shaping us for something better later. So look for those opportunities. But are you in that position? And secondly, who is your Joshua? I've kind of looked at Moses and his idea of leadership and what he's been doing. But Moses poured into Joshua. Moses took time to invest and to make sure that Joshua had these times to where he can step up, he can lead, he can fight, he can speak with God. Moses gave him the opportunities. So who are you investing in so that when you leave, someone can pick up right where you left off and there not be too much of a quote-unquote regime change? So who are you investing in? So my prayer for you is that you find where God wants you, and that you are put in a position that you may not necessarily understand now, but that God will use in an incredible way down the road. And that while you're there, that you find someone to invest in and to pour in, and so that you may better equip them for what they can do later. So thanks, guys, for taking a minute just to kind of walk through this passage with me. And feel free to leave a comment below and let me know what you think. And yeah, happy reading, and keep checking back for more stuff. Thanks, guys.